Three small wooden dolls. Is this, in your opinion, revolutionary art? This is what you say changed the entire industry. The lawyer's voice was mocking as he held up the photographs of my first dolls. Crude attempts that I eventually turned into a $1 million career. While my client was creating new technologies, they brought him coffee. He continued, "Everything you built has been stolen." I sat at the defendant's table, unable to move, while he showed my work on huge bills with the words plagiarism and copy written in red letters. It seemed as if the courtroom was shrinking and there was less and less air. Miss Preston left her job temporarily due to family problems and trusted her assistant to keep the ideas alive. And this woman, he pointed at me, saw an opportunity and built an empire on other people's dreams. My lawyer squeezed my hand under the table, but I barely felt it. 15 years of work were reduced, by the way, to theft in a few minutes. Nights flashed before my eyes when I cut wood until my fingers bled, learned what no one wanted to show, fought for every chance when everyone doubted whether the art of dolls was necessary at all. "The plaintiff wants more than just money," the lawyer said as he walked in front of the jury. "She wants recognition. She wants her vision of art to be recognized, not responded to." I looked across the room. There sat Veronica, my former boss, impeccable, in a light dress, with silver hair pulled back. She did not take her eyes off me. For 15 years, she never contacted me until the lawsuit arrived. She never said that these were her ideas until my exhibition became famous throughout the world. The judge announced a recess. People began to leave, and I remained sitting, staring at the three dolls in the evidence box. They looked so small and ordinary next to what I turned them into. But what if he was right? What if all my talent was built on someone else's foundation? I did not yet know that tomorrow I would reveal the truth that would turn everything upside down, and that my revenge would not be in anger, but in such a revelation that the whole room would freeze. My name is Diana. Before the lawsuit, before fame, before these three, I was just a quiet artist looking for my place in the world. People often said I was too observant. I noticed what others missed, the slightest movement of faces, how light transforms ordinary things into something magical. This sensitivity made me an outsider from childhood, but it was precisely this sensitivity that became my greatest strength as an artist. I came to the Moonlay Theater straight out of art school as a regular assistant with no specific creative role. The theater was located in a former warehouse with high ceilings and huge windows through which light poured. Despite the beautiful building, the company had almost no money. They staged experimental plays that rarely drew large audiences, but had a devoted following among lovers of avant-garde theater. Veronica ruled this small world like a queen. Tall, imposing, with green eyes that seemed to immediately determine your worth. She became famous as a director who created incredibly beautiful and bold productions. Everyone spoke of her almost in hushed tones with respect. I consider myself incredibly lucky to be able to learn from her. "You have good hands," she said during the interview, carefully examining my fingers. "Calm, patient. This is a rarity these days." For 3 months, I did everything. Painted sets, sorted costumes, passed notes between departments, and spent hours watching Veronica from afar. She rarely noticed me, but I absorbed everything. Her technique, her decisions, her leadership style, from brilliant inspirations to cold indifference. At this time, the theater was preparing its most ambitious project, the experimental play Forgotten Whispers. It was to feature actors and life-size puppets, symbolizing memory and dreams. Veronica kept the doll designs a closely guarded secret and worked on them alone in her studio. One morning, everything started as usual. I arrived early, laid out the schedule, and made coffee for the meeting. In the theater, hammers thundered, actors warmed up their voices, and lighting technicians adjusted the spotlights. I was sitting at my table when Veronica suddenly appeared. She had 3 unfinished dolls in her hands. Without saying anything else, she placed them in front of me. "Keep an eye on them. I'll be back in 2 hours." The dolls are like nothing I had ever seen. Not yet finished, but already with great potential. The first one had a face made of light wood, as if the features were visible through the water. and the joints looked like they were floating, not connected. The second, smaller fabric was stretched over a wire frame, and this combination felt both fragility and flexibility. The third one, almost finished, with fine handcrafted details and eyes that seemed to follow every movement. I didn't dare touch them. I just sat and studied how they were made. These techniques were unfamiliar, not what they taught in my school, and not what could be found in books. These dolls seemed alive, even though they were unfinished. Every joint was made as if they could move almost for real. It should have been 2 hours, but for have already passed. In the evening, the theater director Henry appeared. "Where is Veronica? We need her solutions for the backdrop for the stage," he said. "She left me the dolls," I explained. "She said she would be back in 2 hours." But that was in the morning. Henry frowned and called her. After a short conversation, his face darkened. "She has a family problem. She left and will not return for the performance." This news passed through the troupe like an earthquake. Veronica never quit her job, especially halfway through. Meetings began immediately and roles were redistributed. There were only 3 weeks left until the premiere, and now the play had no director. While everyone was rushing around, I sat next to the dolls and didn't know what to do with them. "Henry," I called as he passed by. "And the dolls?" "They're for the show, but they unfinished." He stopped, ran his hand tiredly through his hair and looked at them. "Finish or replace. Decide for yourself. We need something by next week." That evening I was left alone and again looked at the dolls under the work light. I had basic skills, but I had never tried this level. But there was no way out. The performance was on the verge of collapse. I started with something simple. I looked through books in the theater library, searched for information on the internet, but nothing matched what Veronica was doing. Her dolls moved in a special way, and their faces changed expressions at the slightest tilt. For 3 days, I hardly slept, trying to understand her plan, and on the fourth night, I made up my mind. I'll start over, not to copy her methods, which I didn't know, but to come up with my own, inspired by her preparations. I kept the basic ideas, but changed the mechanics. Where she had complex joints, I came up with a simpler but working system. Where I didn't understand her carving on the face, I made a multi-layered method, which also gave expressiveness. I completely reinvented the idea of a fabric doll, experimenting with materials, shape, and stitching. For 2 weeks, I worked nights and weekends. My hands first became blistered, then rough. I learned to carve on pieces of wood until the movements became precise. I watched the dancers, translating their movements into the mechanics of dolls. And the result was not a copy of Veronica, but something new. The dolls still echoed her ideas, but now they expressed my own style. When I brought them to rehearsal, the troupe fell silent. Henry started it and then fell silent. It seems like the first time since I knew him. The lead actress came closer and extended her hand to the largest doll. "Can?" I nodded. She picked up the doll and tried to move it. The doll seemed to come to life in her hands, moving smoothly, almost as if alive. "They're better than Veronica described," the actress whispered. "They have a soul." The day of the premiere has arrived. There was excitement in the air, as always before a performance. I stood backstage and watched through a crack in the curtain as the audience took their seats. The dolls were waiting on stands, ready and perfect, no longer at all like the unfinished figures that Veronica had left behind. The lights in the hall went out. The music started playing. When the first doll came on stage with the actress, they moved as if they had one consciousness. There was a general sigh in the hall. At that moment, I realized that this was my true calling. The performance was a triumph. The audience gave a standing ovation. The reviews were the best in the history of the theater. Critics particularly noted the dolls' revolutionary design, but no one knew that I made them. Everything in the program was written simply. Moonlighter. Team. At the party after the premiere, I hid in a corner while the actors celebrated. Henry found me there. "These dolls." He looked at me carefully. "Veronica didn't do them." "Yes." I hesitated, not knowing what to answer. Then she exhaled. "No." I couldn't repeat her technique. I had to come up with my own. He nodded. "You need to assert yourself, Diana. This is just the beginning of something big." At that time, I didn't yet know how prophetic his words would turn out to be. I didn't know that these 3 dolls would bring Veronica back into my life 15 years later and would have terrible consequences. I never imagined that one day I would stand in court and fight for my legacy against the woman who unwittingly set me on this path. And I certainly didn't know that the envelope I would hand to the judge would turn out to be much more personal than proof of authorship. It will change not only the outcome of the case, but the entire history of who I am. I never planned for dolls to become my life's work. After the success of The Forgotten Whispers, I returned to my duties as an assistant and waited for everything to return to normal when Veronica returned. But weeks passed, then months. Henry suggested that I try making puppets for the next performance of a children's production that usually used simple store-bought puppets. "Show me what you can do now that you have a proper budget," he said, giving me a sum that seemed like a fortune after I'd gotten used to buying materials on sale. This time, I created the puppets myself, not just quick replacements. And it was they that caught the attention of a visiting director from the Bolshoi Theater. He ordered a series of puppets for me for a new production and offered 3 times what Henry could pay. "You can't leave." Henry was indignant when I showed him the offer letter. "I'm not leaving," I reassured him. "I can do both." And for a while, I really did combine everything. During the day, I continued working as an assistant at Moonlay, and at night, in my small apartment, I created my first professional collection of dolls. Word spread quickly in the theater community. Within a year, I had orders from 3 different states at once. I turned the living room into a workshop, and I slept on a fold-out mattress in the corner. The dining table became a carving machine, and the kitchen shelf became a place for paints and varnishes. Constantly experimenting, I developed my own style of dolls with such delicate mechanisms that viewers forgot they weren't living creatures. Their expressions changed depending on the light and angle, and their movements conveyed human emotions almost perfectly. The turning point came when a National Theater Festival selected one of my works for an annual show. This meant that professionals from all over the country would see my dolls. I knew I had to do something special. Thus was born Memory, a doll of an elderly woman whose face, under certain lights, revealed younger versions of herself. A living embodiment of memory and aging. When brought to life on stage, she moved frailly, like an old woman, but sometimes smoothly and easily, like a young girl, as if remembering her past. Afterward, the museum curator showed me, "We are preparing an exhibition on contemporary puppet art. Your work is exactly the direction we want to showcase." The first exhibition led to new invitations. Articles were written. One documentary filmmaker spent 6 months making a film about me. I opened a small studio, hired students, and taught master classes. Gradually, I earned a reputation as an innovator in an art form many considered outdated. 15 years passed. I heard nothing from Veronica. Occasionally, someone I knew would say they'd seen her in Chicago or Seattle, where she'd start new projects but never stayed long. Over the years, I thought of her less and less. The memory of those first 3 dolls almost faded behind hundreds of new ones. And then a letter arrived. I was in the studio, checking the finishing touches on a commission for an international theater festival. My assistant brought the mail. It was registered. I needed to sign for it, she said, handing over the envelope. The return address is for a law firm I've never heard of. Inside was an official notice that Veronica Preston was suing me in my studio. Charges: intellectual property theft, design copying, and millions of dollars in damages. The document stated that the 3 dolls she once left me contained unique elements and techniques that she had been working on for many years. According to her, every subsequent job I did used her methods without credit or compensation. She demanded not only money, but also public recognition that my entire career was based on her work. Attached to the letter were old sketches with dates. They had dolls that were very similar to my style. There were also technical drawings of the joints and facial mechanisms, and they really did resemble the ones I used. I called Henry right away. The voice trembled. "Did you know about this? Did you know she was developing such techniques before she left?" "Diana, it was 15 years ago," he sighed. "No, none of us knew what she was doing. She always kept everything a secret. But there must be theater recordings. How she left, what she said, whether she was going to come back. The owners changed 5 years ago. Most of the archives are gone, and I'm already retired. I can only tell you what I remember." His voice weakened, and I realized the problem. Memories are erased, people leave, documents are lost. Her old sketches remained against my words. I hired the best intellectual property lawyer I could afford. He asked for all the evidence from Veronica. The answer shocked me. She had detailed diaries covering 18 years, detailing step-by-step the development of techniques that were suspiciously similar to mine. There was evidence from her former colleagues. They say that even before she left, she told them about the revolutionary ideas of the dolls and the most difficult photographs of those 3 unfinished dolls, which actually showed elements that later appeared in my works. Could she have falsified these materials? I asked the lawyer. Her notebooks are notarized and officially dated, he replied gloomily, and the photographs have been digitally authenticated. It will be extremely difficult to prove forgery. But she threw the dolls, I objected. Disappeared for 15 years without a word. The fact that she left her job doesn't mean that the right to the ideas automatically passes to you, he explained. Moreover, she claims that at that time she was looking after her mother and child. This seems like a valid reason. Soon the whole industry was talking about the case. The headlines questioned my originality. Former fans grew distant. New orders were frozen until a court decision was made. 15 years of my reputation began to crumble in a matter of weeks. The hearings moved like an avalanche. Veronica's lawyers invited experts who pointed out the similarity between her old sketches and my dolls. The screen showed a comparison of joints, facial structures, movement systems, and the similarities were hard to deny. My experts said that these coincidences are natural, any art develops, and similar solutions could have arisen independently. But their words were drowned out by the mountain of documents that Veronica presented. She played her role perfectly during her performance. An innovator who had a problem, and her vulnerability was exploited by her assistant. I never thought she would take my unfinished ideas and call them her own, Veronica said. Her voice wavered just enough to sound genuinely wounded. At the time, I was struggling with my mother's illness, choosing between my career and my duty to my family. I trusted Diana to guard my ideas, not build a career on them, Veronica said. As she spoke, I looked closely at her face. The woman I once admired had aged beautifully. Silver strands in her dark hair and slight wrinkles made her image even more expressive. Her hands still moved precisely and beautifully, emphasizing the words. These were the same hands that once created the first dolls. Or were they? Suddenly, a strange moment came to mind. When I first came for an interview, she carefully examined my hands and said that they were very stable. At the time, I thought it was just a professional assessment, but now it seemed to me that she was looking at me with a different purpose. That night, I couldn't sleep and pulled out old photos from my first days at the theater. In one group photo, I noticed a calendar in the corner with a poster for a local puppet theater. The name caught my memory. I spent a few hours surfing the internet and finally found an old newspaper article about a small theater that existed 30 years ago. It was run by a couple known for their innovative puppets. The article said that they had tragically died in a workshop fire, leaving behind a 5-year-old daughter. In the photo, they were holding puppets made in a style all too familiar to me. My hands shook as I looked at their faces. The woman had my eyes, the man my smile. At 3 a.m., I called my lawyer. I needed to know if I had been to see my daughter. Diana, do you realize what time it is? What does this have to do with it? What does everything have to do with it? I interrupted. This could be directly relevant. The next days passed in a feverish, I searched for documents I'd never even considered before. My parents, who raised me, died many years ago. They never mentioned adoption, but they also barely talked about my early childhood. With the help of a lawyer, I obtained my birth certificate. It had different parents' names on it. Further research revealed I was adopted at age 5. The exact age the dollmaker's daughter was orphaned. The picture became clearer and more painful. Those dollmakers who died in the fire were my real parents. Their innovative ideas could have perished with them, if not for 3 unfinished dolls that miraculously survived the fire. I received final confirmation from an elderly master doll maker I managed to find. He knew my parents well. These 3 dolls were their main work, he said, making connections. The voice trembled with old age. They were developing a completely new way of movement and expression. In our small community, everyone knew about it, although few people had seen the dolls themselves. After the fire, they disappeared. We thought we were burned too. But how could an outsider find out about this? I asked. There was a journalist then, he recalled. He wrote an article about new approaches in puppetry and interviewed various artists, including your parents. The article was never published. The magazine closed, but while preparing the material, she still saw those unfinished dolls. Do you remember her name? I asked. The old man thought. Todorov, Victoria, Valeria Veronica, I suggested. My inside sank. Yes, exactly. Veronica, a young, ambitious woman, asked very technical questions. The courthouse seemed huge and cold that day. This was supposed to be the last day of the trial. Veronica sat confidently at the lawyer's table, sometimes whispering with her lawyers. The room was full of journalists and industry people, all waiting for my career to collapse. My lawyer begged me this morning to accept the settlement agreement. I could have continued working according to it, but I was obliged to acknowledge Veronica as the author of my methods and pay her large royalties for everything past and future. We don't have enough evidence, he said. Her documents were too strong, but I had one last trump card, the envelope that I was holding in my hands. When the judge declared the hearing open, my lawyer delivered his closing statement, trying to emphasize my independence as an artist, even though he acknowledged the superficial similarities between my work and Veronica's documents. When he finished, I stood up. Your Honor, I have additional evidence. The judge frowned. Lawyer, the trial is already in its final stages. Why wasn't this presented before? I just received final confirmation last night, I replied, approaching the judge's table with a sealed envelope. After lengthy objections from Veronica's lawyers, the judge finally agreed to take a look. He opened the envelope, carefully examined the papers, and his face changed to surprise and even shock. They know what's inside, he asked quietly, nodding towards Veronica and her team. Not yet, I replied. I turned to the hall. Veronica's confident face crumbled. She couldn't know what I found. She couldn't imagine that her carefully built business was about to collapse. But something in my gaze told her, the situation is changing. I didn't yet know that these words would save not only my career. They will uncover a theft far more serious than the methods of work, the theft of my identity. And I couldn't imagine then that my retribution would come not through the destruction of Veronica, but through the return of what had always belonged to me. The judge cleared his throat and prepared to announce what was contained in the envelope. Evidence that will turn everything upside down, both the case and Veronica and me. He returned the documents to me, allowing me to continue. I turned to the hall. There was complete silence there. Not even the usual rustling sounds could be heard. It seemed that everyone understood that something fateful was about to happen. Your Honor, respected court, I began in an unexpectedly firm voice. I want to show 3 documents that will tell the real story of these dolls, I said. First, I picked up the first document. This is my birth certificate. Diana Merrick, daughter of Thomas and Eleanor Merrick. I'm 35 years old now. I put on the table. These were my parents. Then I showed the yellowed newspaper clipping. Here is an obituary from 30 years ago. This tells of the death of Thomas and Eleanor Merrick in a fire in their workshop. They were renowned puppeteers who invented new techniques of movement and expression. I was only 5 years old then. The third document was a small article with a photograph. This is a note from a local art magazine from a month before their death. There are 3 revolutionary dolls mentioned here that my parents worked on. The article says that they were not kept in the main workshop, but in a separate studio where they sometimes held classes. I looked directly at Veronica for the first time. Her face froze, her eyes staring at the documents. The fire destroyed the main workshop and took the lives of my parents. Then I was adopted by family friends. They never talked about my past, thinking it would be easier. I grew up not knowing who I really was. The judge leaned forward. And what does all this have to do with dolls, Miss Merrick? I showed the last page in the folder. This is the official statement of Martin Weber, a doll maker who knew my parents well. It says that Veronica Preston, then a journalist, interviewed my parents 2 months before they died. She saw those 3 dolls and took detailed notes. Veronica's lawyer jumped up. I object. This is a rumor and has nothing to do with the copyright case. On the contrary, my lawyer replied, this directly relates to the origins of the designs that Ms. Preston claims as her own. The judge overruled the objection and nodded for me to continue. After my parents died, these 3 dolls disappeared. Everyone thought they were burned, but that was not the case. I turned to Veronica again. You found them, didn't you? You realized that they were kept in the training studio, not in the workshop that burned down. Veronica's hands trembled, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. You spent years tracking them down and bought them from a distant relative who didn't know their value. And then, when she became the artistic director of the Moonlay Theater, she did something else. I took a deep breath. You found me. A whisper rolled through the hall. It was not an accident. You hired me just 3 months after I graduated from art school. You saw my student work at the exhibition. Did you know who I was? The daughter of those very same innovative puppeteers whose methods you appropriated. You wanted to check if I inherited their talent. The judge raised his hand. Ms. Merrick, these are serious accusations. Do you have proof that Ms. Preston knew who you were? I nodded and took the last document out of the envelope. This is my application form for the Moonlight Theater. My emergency contact information is listed here. My adoptive Aunt Sarah Reynolds. And here on the back is a note in Veronica's handwriting. She asked the HR manager to check Sarah Reynolds' connection with the Merrick family. The hall became quiet. The judge studied the document carefully. I looked straight at Veronica. When you placed those 3 dolls on my desk 15 years ago, you weren't just getting rid of unfinished projects, you were giving me back my legacy. You wanted to know if I would understand their structure as well as my parents did. Veronica's lawyer whispered something to her, but she waved it off and continued to look at me. Well, I don't understand. So why did you come back now? I said, why did you file a lawsuit after so many years? These techniques were never yours. For the first time, Veronica spoke directly to me. Because you surpassed them, she said quietly. Your parents were geniuses, but you went further. I watched your career from afar, waiting for you to reveal your talent. She stood up, ignoring the lawyer. Those dolls were revolutionary, but limited. I tried to develop their methods myself and failed. But you understood everything at once and created more than I could have imagined. So, this is a distortion of envy, the judge asked. Veronica shook her head. Because of the confession, I wanted the world to know that these techniques have a beginning and a source. My parents, I replied. Not you. But I kept them, she said almost pleadingly. I rescued these dolls when no one cared about them. I could have hidden them forever, but I returned them to their heir. The judge interrupted. Miss Preston, do you admit that you appropriated designs that are not yours? The lawyer tried to object, but Veronica stopped him with a gesture. I'm saying I protected my legacy. I preserved these techniques while trying to pass them off as my own and sue for millions, the judge remarked. The trial quickly came to an end. The judge not only dismissed Veronica's claim, but also handed the materials over to the prosecutor for a possible fraud investigation. He also officially confirmed my rights to all the works and methods. As the courtroom began to empty, Veronica approached me. Her lawyers followed her, clearly concerned about her actions. They will be proud of you, she said quietly. I knew at the moment I saw your hands. You have your father's hands. You hold the tools in the same way, and your movements are also precise. It's in you from them, in the blood. You could have told me, I replied, the anger I expected to feel somehow not there. You could have told their story, not try to steal it. Would you have believed it? She asked. A stranger who tells you that your life is not at all as you knew it. I thought, maybe not, but you didn't even try. She nodded, agreeing. When I saw what you made of those unfinished dolls, how quickly you solved the problems that I had been struggling with for years. I realized you really were their daughter. I should have left then. Why didn't you leave? She glanced at the reporters crowding around. I convinced myself that I deserved credit for preserving their work, for connecting you to your legacy. Even if you didn't know it yourself. Suit, it was a mistake, she admitted. Especially when a museum called you the most innovative voice in contemporary doll art. In me something broke. I spent 20 years studying their methods, and you mastered them in weeks without even realizing what you were doing. She turned to leave. Veronica, I called after her. Those notes in your notebooks about the joint mechanisms, about the modifications to make the dolls move more smoothly. That wasn't in my parents' designs. She stopped. No, that's mine. Small modifications, but they were valuable. Yes, I agreed. That system of movable joints changed everything about the doll's movement. A shadow of gratitude flickered across her face, but she quickly gathered herself and left with her team of lawyers through a crowd of screaming journalists. Outside, the phone kept ringing and vibrating. The story had spread throughout the art community. And it wasn't just about my victory in court, but also about the discovery that I was connected to the legendary doll makers Merrick. The galleries that had stayed out of the way during the lawsuit wanted exhibitions again. Theaters confirmed orders. Documentary filmmakers proposed projects. But amidst this chaos, I felt a strange calm. For the first time, I had a foothold. I understood why making dolls had always seemed to me not like training, but like remembering. Hands don't forget, even if the mind does. A week after the trial, I received a package at the workshop. Inside was an old leather case. In it were faded photographs of my parents, technical drawings in my father's handwriting, and a letter from my mother, written to me on my 6th birthday, which she didn't live to see. Attached to all this was a note from Veronica. This always belonged to you. I kept it until you were ready. This is the last thing I've collected about your parents over the years. Now their legacy is completely in your hands, where it belongs. There was no signature or return address on the envelope. It was the final touch in our strange, intertwined story. 3 months later, I opened a new exhibition, not with my own works, but with restored dolls of my real parents, next to 3 original ones. The figures that started it all. In the center of the room, I placed a special work, my doll, created using Veronica's floating joint system. The plaque read, "In doll making, we always build on what came before." It was a work honoring the Merrick family legacy and acknowledging Veronica Preston's contribution. It wasn't exactly forgiveness, but recognition. What she wanted all along. My revenge wasn't to destroy her, but to reclaim my history and make room for the truth. The exhibition catalog told the whole journey, how my parents' innovative ideas endured, how their techniques live on in my dolls, and even how Veronica's mistakes ultimately helped me connect with my past. Critics called it the most powerful origin story in contemporary art. On opening day, as the room filled with people, I stood in front of a photograph of my parents holding dolls that looked remarkably like the ones I now create. A journalist approached me with a voice recorder. "What does it feel like to suddenly discover your artistic DNA?" I thought about it and said, "It's like finding the missing piece in a doll, the joint that makes everything move correctly." I've always known how to bring things to life. Now I know why. And Veronica Preston? What do you make of her current situation? I shook my head. Her story is her story. Mine is here, in this room, between the past and the future. As a reporter walked away, I noticed a figure at the exit. Silver strands of hair, a familiar posture. Our eyes met. Veronica nodded almost imperceptibly and disappeared through the door. Some stories end in a loud scandal, others in a quiet confession. Mine ended with me reclaiming my past, my craft, and my future. The orphan daughter of puppeteers found her way home thanks to the same hands that once tried to take away her legacy. In puppet theater, they say the true artist disappears, only the puppet remains. Perhaps this is the best ending to my story. Not people, but what we created, and it will outlive us all. If this story of regained heritage and justice touched you, like and subscribe to hear even more stories of search and rebirth. And in the comments, tell us what talents or family traits you've inherited. Have you discovered anything about your past that has changed the way you see yourself? Your stories and support help this channel continue to bring such human stories to life. Thank you for being with Diana on her journey to what was always rightfully hers.